Hi, everyone. I'm very delighted to introduce to you Laura Davis, who is our today's participant in our first session of the post-production of the European Poetry Festival 2023. Some words about Laura. She is particularly interested in contemporary poetry. She's doing that on the page, visually, through sound, film, and performance. Her first collection, Found and Lost, came out in 2022 and followed a solo exhibition of textile poetry that was a collection ran at the Green Door Gallery in Brussels this year. Her poems have appeared in Ink, Sweat, Tears, and The Scene as Red Anthology, Live Canon Anthology, the 3 AM magazine, Writers Kingston, the Book of Penteract, and Harpy Hybrid Review. She's not unknown to fans of the Poetry Festival. She performed 2022 at the Slovenian evening, and this year she took part in the Flanders evening, where she performed a poem together with Lotte Dodion, which had a powerful message. Now, hi, Laura.
Hi, very good to be here. So, very well, thank you.
Perfect. I will start with some of my questions that I have, and I'm very excited to have you here today and delighted to speak to you. And yeah, let's just start, I guess. So, very unusual question, but I thought maybe it will ease up things. What is the most unusual thing you have right now in your fridge?
The second celeriac. We eat quite a lot of celeriac, or Witterzelde, as it's called here in Flanders, white celery. But we don't normally have two because there was a bit of a wires crossed in the shopping. And also it's a bit of a funny time of year for celeriac. So yes, unusually we have two celeriac in the fridge.
Oh, that's very, very good. It's very healthy, I guess, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, it is very healthy. It's very nice.
Do you eat it just raw or you juice it? What are you doing with that?
Cook it usually, kind of make it into something a bit like mashed potato or mixed with mashed potato. That's called stump in Belgium. Or you can make it into kind of fries. Obviously, fries are big here, but you can't eat fries all the time. So yes, and you can have it raw as well. Yeah, but it's very nice. I like it a lot anyway, and it's and it's a very old vegetable, and it's very knobbly, so it looks very old as well. So
yeah. Sounds good. I mean, Belgian and even the fries, Dutch fries, are very known in Germany as well, and I think throughout the UK. So yeah, sounds very good.
Yeah, lovely.
So yeah, let's talk about traveling. What is your funniest or most awkward story about traveling? Do you have one?
I've traveled a lot. And for the last 10 years or so, I've been based in Central Africa, in Jerusalem. And I've had a couple of unusual travel experiences. But one of them was basically when I was in a boat crossing Lake Kivu in the east of Congo, a small motorboat, like the type you would find on a lake in Europe for, pleasure in the summer. Anyway, it was very full of people. And there was a guy in captain's uniform. He was the second in command. He was telling me in the boat. We were all sitting together, and then something went wrong with the engine, and it started to sort of make this chugging sound, tick 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 tick. And he looked out of the window and he said, "Oh, there's a storm coming." And so, anyway, to cut a long story short, was that it was an extremely bumpy and an extremely fast ride across the lake because we had to outrun the wind. But we did. It was all fine. But there were a couple of moments where it was definitely hairy. And yes. Anyway, perhaps not one to revisit too often. But it was very, very bumpy. And we beat the storm. We got there ahead of time.
Lucky you. Any dangerous animals you experienced on the ride, or?
Not on that particular one. I've traveled quite a bit if you drive around in Uganda, you see, sometimes if you're lucky, you see elephants at the side of the road. And when I was many years ago, I was working in Congo, in the north of Congo. So you have to fly into Uganda, drive up the Ugandan border, and go back into Congo. And I had this man who was driving me, and we were going along the road, and I went, elephants! And he slammed on the brake, and he looked at me and he was like, what? And I said, look, there are elephants. And there were elephants just like you would see sheep or cows or whatever at the side of the road. And he was like, yeah, and what is it, lady? What's the problem? And I was like, elephants. Anyway, so yes, so elephants can be dangerous, of course. Mosquitoes are more dangerous. Come across quite a lot of those. Yeah, I mean, some of these, rivers you don't necessarily want to swim in, things with big teeth, but other lakes are beautiful and fantastic to swim in. So, it depends on what's around. But yeah, so lots of beautiful animals and lots of beautiful birds as well. So bird life is particularly lovely in Central Africa.
Yeah, it's a nature that we are not that used to in Europe, I guess. So sounds beautiful. Coming back to the European Poetry Festival, what is like an experience you want to share with us? Do you have one like in 3 words? Is there like, to cut it short?
Yeah, I think I always find it surprising, varied, and most of all fun. So you get these amazing people from all over Europe who come and perform a massive variety of poetry. But the thing that they all have in common is they really put themselves into it. And often they're doing this in their second or third or whatever, not their mother tongue, not their native language. So it is the most extraordinary thing. I love it. I think it's a brilliant experience, and every performance is different and every evening is different, and yet they all kind of have a similarity between them. So yeah, that wasn't, I started with 3 words and then I did rather a lot more, but there you are.
Thank you for that. I think it sums it up in a good way. Another question, talking about one of your poems, the last poem that you performed at the Flanders evening of the festival, I thought had a very powerful message. Can you share anything for us? Maybe some of the listeners were there at the evening and also have some thoughts about it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this was an amazing experience. So I was collaborating with Lotte Dodion, as you said at the outset, who lives up the road in Antwerp, and we met to work out what we were going to do, what we were going to collaborate on. And it turns out that we have a lot of interest in common beyond poetry, and we're both feminists, and we're both very concerned about the position of women worldwide. And she's worked on some amazing projects. Like if you check her website and stuff she's done at the Rubenshaus Museum, for example. And so together we came up with this plan to do a set of haikus, some of which we found. So they're not all original by any stretch of the imagination. And I also asked to friends of mine, Fatima Ayub and Asha George, to send me haikus or similar short poems in Polish and Arabic, and so we ended up with this collection of haikus from all, from many different parts of the world, and one that Lotte and I had written ourselves. And then as we were talking, we kept on coming around to this question about progress and going forward and backwards and forwards and backwards. And if you look at women's rights and women's participation in public life in Europe, in Belgium, in the UK, across Europe, it's a question of going forwards and backwards. And quite often it feels like you're going backwards faster than you're going forwards. And then we both realized, that there's this, particularly in this part of Europe, is that there is this strong resonance with the Etenach procession, which is a religious procession. It doesn't have anything to do with women's rights particularly, but it's the 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So, and that seemed to fit very well also with the rhythm of a haiku. So we had our set of haikus, and then we performed it doing 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And as it happened, we also, Etenach fit very nicely into the into the syllable scheme for a haiku as well. So yeah, it was a fantastic collaboration. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, it was great. So we'd very much like to pick that up again somehow, actually, some other time. So, but I know it's on the YouTube channel for anyone who's interested in that.
Yeah, you plugged it there. I think all of performances can be found as at SJ Fowler, his YouTube channel, who's also the initiator of the European Poetry Festival. Very interesting. Yeah, I saw actually the YouTube video and how you visualize that one step forward, two step backwards, or vice versa. And how in the last part, it also went stereo, where you talked and also Lotte did. And that was also a very interesting effect. Did it go as you planned it? Was it like perfectly done, or was it like, oh, we need to improvise, it's a different room or something? How did it go? It's very exciting.
Yeah, well, we had different ideas actually, and originally we had thought we would use recorded voices, including in other languages. And of course, Lotte was also speaking in Dutch, as well as English. So the performance went. Oh no, it didn't go exactly as planned, because we were lucky. Just the second before we started, there was a massive announcement from in the building, and so if that had happened 5 seconds later, we would have had to have stopped and started again. But actually, as it happened, it was fine. We just waited, and then we went again. Of course, Steve was running all this. But what we wanted was this sort of sense of again, it's to build on this 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But if that is horizontal, to also build vertically. So lots of different things are happening at the same time. I love sound poetry, and I love cascading sounds. And also it gives this sense of there's many different ways of doing it, right? So we are not saying that there is one way of progress, not at all. We have all these different sounds, different voices. And like I say, it's trying to integrate the vertical with the horizontal, and the notion that you go in different ways. And I think also for us, for that reason, it was quite important that at the end we split, but we stay together. Our voices are still together, and then we both climb the stairs at the side. So yeah, and it's an amazing space at Kingston. I mean, it's huge. I always feel like I'm in a Roman theatre or something. And it's amazing if you want to move around. And play with sound.
Very interesting, yeah. And the unison at the end, I guess, it makes the picture whole in a way. Yeah, interesting.
Right. And there's lots of different women have lots of different points of view and lots of different perspectives. But the point was that this was also about having, but trying to capture that somehow, that we're standing together. Yeah. That's how I interpret it anyway. So yeah, maybe Lotte sees it differently.
Coming to our next question, written poetry versus reading poetry out loud. Do you see the difference? Do you write like poetry maybe for speaking it out loud, like the haikus that you prepared for the festival, or would you say it's something completely different? It's just.
I think there are. I think there is a strong. For me, there's quite a strong overlap in that a lot of page poetry, should we say? I think it's great that it is read out loud or it is performed. But then there's also some forms of page poetry that might be performed, but are just so long. Like, to be honest, no, you're going to read it maybe, but you're not going to listen to it all in one go. And then there's the performance poetry, which is very difficult to write down, and maybe can't be written down. And I love that as well. So I'm avoiding answering the question, I suppose, but I do see there's an overlap, but I also see they are distinct forms. And I love some of the performance poetry that can't be written down or can't be successfully written down, I think. And but also then there is written poetry that comes alive completely when you hear it performed. And performed well, but that's that in a way that's a bit of an obvious thing. Like the best poems or the best plays in the world can sound dreadful if they're performed badly, but if they're performed well, then it's just an amazing experience.
Interesting. Is there like poetry which you would maybe like just write for your own, and not share with anyone, and see that as not something you would publicate any time?
I suppose so. I think that tends to go in revision. Like, I think I would put it the other way around. Is like, I think most of what I write, I would and write or write for performance. I would, you know, I would perform in some way. I don't do any sort of particularly confessional confessional poetry or anything like that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Coming to our next question. So you're writing in English. Is that your mother tongue, or would you say like writing in English is something completely different for you?
I write mainly in English. So sometimes I write between English and French. So I'm very much a fan of Matthew's corpus, where you use words that are written the same in English and in French, but mean something different. And my mother tongue is English, and I was born and brought up in the UK, but I haven't lived in Britain for 25 years. And in my family, we are mixed language. So we speak English and Dutch. And so, yes, I am at home in English, and English is where I feel my home, but I'm no longer connected, directly connected on a daily basis to English as it is spoken in Britain anymore. And so there are many, many Englishes in the world, right? And I suppose that I fit into some of this, I don't know, overseas English, should we say, or diaspora English, or anyway, but a different form of English. And I think it's quite interesting. I was talking about this with a friend recently, and if I go to London, I never feel out of place, because everybody goes in London, right? City that big, speak however you want, whatever language you want. But if I go back to, say, where I'm from, which is in the West Midlands, which I don't do very often, or if I'm in sort of where my parents live, which is in a rural place that I've never lived in, then I feel very much a foreigner. And it's to do with language. It's also to do with not being from these places, but it is also to do with language and how I feel and sound away. So, yeah, I mean, English is my mother tongue, but I live between languages. And for a long time, I'm an immigrant in Belgium, and I've lived as an expatriate in Africa and in the Middle East. And one of the things that really interests me about language is actually the limits of it. And so this is one of the things, what I mean is one of the things I love about poetry is that you can go beyond the limits of language. And so I think that I and other English speakers actually should be writing more in other languages. But this sort of these gray zones between languages really interest me.
Thank you for that. Yeah, very interesting to switch between languages and also perceive poetry, which is like a medium which I think is maybe more flexible when it comes to performance between languages, to just like have it in a sense, you know. So I really get what you say. Yeah. Okay, I think.
And if I can add on that, is that, you know, Steve's work really opened my eyes to the possibility of this. So, and I started doing an online course with him several years ago, and it led me to two very, very important directions. One was as an exposure to European poetry. So all of this poetry that's going on in other languages in Europe, and beyond language. And then also, it sparked my own interest in textile poetry, because I think that somewhere along the line there was a question like, what would a poem look like if you didn't write with a pen and paper, but you wrote with something else? And I was thinking of a needle and thread. And so then you get into this whole, that is, with those kinds of questions and those kind of approaches, is that suddenly this whole world opens up, right? And so I think that's extraordinary. To go back then, you know, sort of to the European Poetry Festival, is that the possibilities of each of those performances are so huge because of that approach to language and to performance and to beyond language.
Yeah. You were talking about textiles. When people visit your webpage, there pops up immediately like a textile. What exactly is it? Can you say something about that?
Yeah, but this was work that I developed over the last couple of years, and also as part of the Popper Group Collective, which Steve convenes. And it's a way of exploring. For me, it's a way of exploring how to express precisely questions that fall difficultly, so to say, in language. So I think, one of the pieces that I worked on, which is actually just behind me here, this bottom one, it reflects on questions about memory. So, in our memories is that we hold many things at the same time, many ideas at the same time. And a lot of those ideas are fragments. A lot of those ideas are false. They are what we've edited backwards or acquired memories. And also they're very unreliable. Like our memories are unreliable. And so, especially as somebody who's been away from home, and home is already a complicated concept, but coming back, and you're coming back to a place that has changed since you remember it. And that with a sort of temporary move is that if you're always thinking about where you're going back to. So this notion of looking forwards and looking back, I found it very satisfying to express that more through textile, combining textile and paper, for example, textile and text, than only in text. So that was part of that. So yes, and I have that on my website. Yeah. But.
Very exciting to see different outputs of your like creative work and different like medias, right? I think there are a lot of questions you already answered by just answering one question, so we've been through that very fast. I have one last question for you. What would you suggest to poets from a non-English speaking country who write in English? What could you give them for their further path? I'm also very interested in that question.
I don't know. I've been pondering on that question, and I'm still unsure. I think first of all, do it if you want to, but don't if you don't. And I think again, it comes back to this question of all these multiple Englishes that exist, right? And some of these Englishes are tied to particular places, like, I don't know, British English or English from Newcastle in the northeast of England, or American English or Nigerian English or Indian English, all of those, Ugandan English. All of these are different Englishes, but there is also a kind of international English or a different international Englishes that aren't tied to any of those places. And that commonly the people who speak those languages are speaking them as their second or their third or the fourth or whatever language. And those are very, very interesting languages, I think. And so I don't think that anyone should ever feel, if they're writing in English, that it somehow has to be correct English or good English. You just have to do it and it be your English. If English has become a lingua franca in many ways, but that doesn't mean that anybody should dominate it. I think that everybody should just take ownership of it, and that will also lead, I think, to extremely interesting expression. Obviously, one of the challenges there is with poetry, and I think this is even more true of poetry than most other art forms, is the challenge of translation, because it is really hard to translate poetry well, because often a word in a poem is holding four thoughts or something at the same time, which it simply isn't in a novel, for example, or not usually. And so if that isn't then accessible to other people, it's a pity. But that's not to say that everybody should be writing for everybody. I mean, I don't think anybody should really write for anybody other than themselves. And so therefore, excuse me, and I apologize, turn out to be a ridiculously long answer to this question, but I do think that people should write in English if they want to, and not worry about whether or not it's so-called correct. But the other thing that I did mention before, but would like to insist on more, is I do think that poets writing in English, or who consider English to be their mother tongue, so should also, if they want to, but should also perhaps try and if they speak other languages, or they want, as I say, they want to, nobody should do anything particularly, but I would be very interested in seeing more work coming from English speakers that is not in English. And I think that's something that you also get a bit of a taste of sometimes at the European Poetry Festival, where you have people who perhaps don't have a language in common, and yet they are finding ways to collaborate on through the medium of English usually, but often with spin-offs from that. Yeah, so I think that's what I would say.
Thank you so much for that. I definitely, because I'm also not a native English speaker, obviously, I really think that bringing in different cultural influences can also make English more rich, and therefore a more powerful, cultural language, and that would be a benefit, I think, to everyone, basically. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think, but I think this is also, again, this is where poetry and perhaps art, sort of visual art, can also have much more in common, in the sense that I think that that obviously there is visual poetry and so on, doesn't necessarily use text or language, but even in the more language-based poetry, is that we can draw a lot of inspiration, I think, from visual arts, because precisely for this reason, that just because I happen to be born in one place and you happen to be born in another place, and that the people who were also born in those places or were in those places happen to speak these particular languages, that that is in a way neither here nor there. There is something else. There is something which is much more important than that, and finding ways of communicating that, I think, is a huge it's hugely important, and also pretty difficult, but hugely important, because we're not defined by the languages that we're born into or educated in, or we shouldn't. I certainly don't want to be. So yeah, it's an amazing eye-opener to have in, like you say, if you have people writing from different experiences, then you have your world is opened up massively just by turning a page. What more could you ask for than that? Or listening to somebody perform, like, brilliant.
Yeah, definitely. That's Laura, thank you so much for that. I really enjoyed our short session. Anything you want to plug? Anything? I mean, people can find you on Instagram, on Twitter. You have your own website. Anywhere where you will be performing next? Is there anything upcoming? Let us know.
Okay, well, I'm performing with the Popper Guru Collective on the 2nd of July in the 100 Years Gallery, brilliant gallery in Hoxton in London, to mark the launch of Steve's book, How Do You Do in Devon, and then there will be more performances, and hopefully also in Brussels and in Berlin in the autumn. So, but as you say, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram and I have a website. So. And I'd love to hear news of other poets and what they're up to, especially if you're in and around Belgium, because I'm enjoying being back and sort of connecting with poets who are based a little closer to home. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, you heard it here. If you're from Belgium, from the Netherlands, maybe some parts of Germany, Laura is very interested to connect with you.
Indeed, maybe some parts. Yeah, exactly. No, of course, all of this. And
drop a message.
même les Français, even the French.
French. Everybody's welcome. Love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Yes.
and hope to see you soon. And everybody who enjoyed the video, yeah, please give us a follow. We would very like that. See ya.
Bye. Thank you very much, Richard. Bye.
Bye bye.